Hello and welcome back to my YouTube video. Today I'm going to be doing my 14.12 top lane tier list. So if you enjoy content, like, subscribe, and let's get into it. There were a couple of changes this patch. We saw a pretty hefty nerf towards the likes of Tryndamere. Skarner received a bit of an adjustment. We saw some changes towards some of the mid lane skewed top laners. The likes of Akali and Yone received changes. Same goes for both Twisted Fate and Vladimir for that matter as well. But let's talk about the changes. So to begin with, the D tier is going to consist of Yasuo still. His champion's still underperforming within the top lane. He's a bit better within mid lane when people started moving over towards Fleet rather than PTA, and some of his other build variations kind of flexing depending on what you need within the game. He did improve a bit, but he's still underperforming within the top lane. He will sit within my top lane D tier. Moving on, we have Smolder. Smolder is also within the D tier. He's probably one of the higher D tier options at the moment. He's not as bad as the likes of Yone. He actually can function well within top lane. I'm honestly surprised his champion's actually consistently held a play rate ever since his release. Usually what you see is champions get flexed across multiple roles when they are released, and then they'll like settle in one or two. But in Smolder's case, he's still holding play rate within top lane. Not so much mid lane, but main role obviously being ADC. Smolder not performing too badly, but still underperforming. Obviously tends to be a bit weaker within the top lane. Sits within my D tier, but very close to the C tier at the moment. Gangplank actually underperforming a decent amount. Probably deserves to be sat here. Actually, I'm going to move Smolder up, so I'll leave Smolder over my C tier. I think Smolder actually does a spot here compared to some of the other D tier options. But Gangplank received a health and armor growth buff in 14.11. It didn't do enough. He still underperforms. He still struggles with his itemization. The loss of essence for Eva really did hurt him quite a bit. He sits within the D tier. Moving on, we have Cassante. So Cassante, obviously an incredibly pro-elite skewed champion. Massively underperforms within mid and low elo, which is what this tier list is targeted towards. If you're going builds, I would recommend the likes of Kaenic Rookin into heavy AP top sides, like AP top, AP jungle. Other than that, you're standard mostly going your Iceborne Gauntlet. That tends to be his best performing option. His champion still does underperform though. He sits within the D tier. Moving on, we have Viego. So Viego's play rate has basically fallen back to where it was ever since he kind of got lane buff changes. He's functions quite nicely within mid lane. I'd recommend playing mid lane Viego if you are looking to play some form of lane Viego. He just doesn't really have the play rate nor the win rate to really support him within the top lane. He might get removed next patch, but he sits within my D tier for the moment. Still underperforming. Lee Sin also holds a play rate, mainly carried over. I actually don't even have him here, but Lee Sin also underperforms quite significantly. Once again, a champion which could probably do with just being removed from the top lane tier list. Both Lee Sin and Viego, jungle champions with kits which should function or like have functioned previously within the top lane. Lee Sin, obviously we had the Gore Drinker Emax stuff, that's long gone. Yeah, he underperforms at this point. He sits within the D tier. Yeah, Viego's case still underperforms within the top lane. Probably needs a bit more of help here if they do want to support it going in the long run. Sejuani, also a champion which could probably do with being removed from the top lane tier list. Once again, her play rate has gone back to basically where it was. She received some changes to kind of help her out in solo queue over competitive play. Competitive play of Sejuani obviously doesn't get as much gold. You tend to give more of that to your team and play on very low econ. Maybe going the likes of a Barmies into a Knight's Vow within solo queue, you tend to see a lot more hearts to Sejuani. In top lane, we did see some AP hybrid health builds. None of them really picked up a huge amount. When we did see a consistent amount of play with like Leandri Sejuani, its win rate really did tank. It requires a unique play style and a lot of learnings. And it's not something you can run every game. Yeah, she sits within the C tier. Once again, a champion like Viego and Lee Sin, which could probably do with being removed. Rammus does see a bit of play rate. Obviously, his play rate used to be held up by Vabaus playing him a bit. He still, standalone, has a bit of play rate. You tend to see him when Malphite is banned and you need an anti-AD option. He's not great performance in the top lane. Yeah, once again, you're really only using this champion as a counter pick. He underperforms, so he sits within the C tier. Jace, not doing too hot, has been in a pretty bad spot for solo queue for a while. He doesn't actually see a huge amount of competitive play at the moment. He has seen games here and there. Obviously, he tends to operate a bit better within high elo solo queue. That is where Jace is most prevalent. Mid lane, seems to outperform top lane at the moment. Obviously, First Strike got nerfed this patch, that will hurt him. You will probably go back to the likes of Electrocute and Phase Rush. Electrocute obviously being changed in 14.13. I don't know how this will directly change Jace, but yeah, mostly going to be sat on the Phase Rush at the moment. But underperforms within the top lane ever since Eclipse got changed, like almost a season ago at this point. From it used to have lethality, no longer obviously has lethality in the armor pen. He definitely struggles a lot more with the current Eclipse. He sits within the C tier. Olaf, really kind of struggling at the moment. Like, they didn't compensate this champion when they ended. So they nerfed Olaf like twice in a row, and then they nerfed Ghost, and this champion has been underperforming since, like, what would have been 14.10 when they made those changes. Olaf's still struggling. This champion sits within the C tier at the moment. Obviously, he's predominantly good into tanks where you can make use of your ultimate and just hold up time, being able to chew through lanes with the built-in armor pen on Q. But he sits within the C tier at the moment, definitely underperforming. Akali actually going to be moved down to the D tier. This champion got nerfed pretty heavily this patch. Actually, I'd reckon over nerfed if anything. They took a big swing at her E damage. The base value went down by like 30 to 100, which is a huge swing. Obviously, she reclawed back some of that through the total AD ratio going up from 85% to 100%, but not enough. She still definitely underperforms compared to where she was the patch before. She now moves from the C tier down to the T tier, down to the D tier within the top lane. Moving on, Vladimir actually moves up to the B tier. So this champion was in my C tier. I'll cover him in a second. I'll wrap up the two last champions here. So Na and Uda are going to be the other two champions in C tier. These two picks definitely are underperforming at the moment. In Na's case, they're just worried he would take over competitive if he's ever strong again. They gave him some buffs in 14.11. They did enough to move him out of the D tier into the C tier, but to the average top laner, he does underperform. In Uda's case, he tends to be a bit harder to pilot as one of the tankier options within the top lane. Also, his itemization just for a long time has been pretty bad. Like, it's always felt fairly rough to go things past Liandry. Like, you want to go tanky variants, but then none of the tank items felt great. Obviously, Frozen Heart was what he abused for a while when it was overpowered. The likes of Abyssal can be an option. Obviously, it's very cheap now. Jaxo was something he wanted, but it feels really bad to buy early on into your build. There are other options, but none of them really stuck. And yeah, he underperforms because of that. He sits within the C tier. Vladimir, in the B tier, obviously got buffed this patch. The W damage went up, combined with some health ratio buff, combined with a health ratio buff, and I believe he gets penalized a bit less for casting W. Overall, these changes did help him a bit. They were towards his weakest ability, which I mean, in a way, is good, but it's also his least interactive ability. So whether that was the right direction for them to take, I don't know. It's a case for like the Vladimir mains to really decide on whether this change actually was a feels good or kind of a bit of a nothing burger. In this case, though, he did receive a bit of a bump up because of the changes. He now sits within the B tier. Moving on, so Aurelia obviously got nerfed in 14.11. She's felt that buff quite a bit. I honestly thought she would kind of salvage some of that through shield bow being buffed, but people haven't really moved over to that item. Obviously, the other options are things like your Sundered Sky after your Bork, Wit's End, Kraken Slayer if you're snowballing. That is something which functions quite nicely on this champion. Shield bow, just not really performant, as performant as some of her other options, and it's not really that popular to go. Sits within the B tier now. Obviously, took a bit of a hit with those nerfs. Akshan, close to the C tier. Obviously, his play rate within top lane is massively down. Like, obviously, he was popularized quite heavily by Drew. That was someone who played him quite a bit. The pick rate declined significantly. Obviously, he's been nerfed a couple of times. He's very solo queue bound. They've kind of tried to unelite skew Akshan, but in this case, these were just generalistic nerfs. They've definitely hurt him quite a bit. He now drops towards the bottom of the B tier, close to the C tier. Moving on, we have Ryze. Ryze, once again, is a pick I really like. I think this champion definitely has a lot of strengths, within the top lane especially. He's not that popular, but the builds are fine for him at the moment. The Roa, the Seraphs, the Rabadon, stuff like this, all work quite nicely in this champion. If he got a bit more of a buff, I could definitely see him rising up towards like the A and the S tiers. He's definitely like a high-sitting B tier champion. Silas, a direct counter pick into Malphite for the most part. You're not really going to see this champion outside of that, but he definitely has strengths. Obviously, he's alright at the moment. He's a decent mid laner. function nicely in the top laner. You tend to see Electrocute and sometimes Q-Max variants if you're going like the First Strike. Obviously, First Strike now for this patch. So you'll probably go back to running the likes of W into E-Max, Electrocute, playing on Lichbane Burst. He's still a solid option though, a good B tier pick. Moving on, Twisted Fate now sits towards the bottom of the B tier as well. I actually have Twisted Fate in my B tier for 14.11 as well. I think this champion's really bait to play if you're not very proficient at it and you're not someone who's like proficient at playing lane bullies. Obviously, if that is your strengths, then he was definitely someone you could abuse quite nicely. But if you got punished in laning phase, you died a lot. It could be quite hard to pilot this champion outside of like if you're not massively advantageous. Obviously, the nerfs towards him have definitely punished him a lot more this patch. I believe the attack speed growth has gone down by 0.8. Combined with that, they also nerfed some of his AP ratios and tried to like change around his W mana cost. It's definitely hurt him. He now sits towards the bottom of the B tier. Darius, also a champion akin to Olaf, who definitely took a big hit from Ghost. He was someone who really benefited from that summoner spell. He's still a solid B tier option though. Stridebreaker gives him like the gap closing potential he needs in a lot of situations, but the itemization is fine. Obviously, he tends to be a bit more elite skewed as an early game aggressive lane bully. That tends to be the direction a lot of the early game champions go. But yeah, he's definitely struggling with Ghost being nerfed. He is now sat within my B tier. Aatrox received a bunch of adjustments this patch. He had a health ratio slapped onto his E. The R healing's gone up. The E healing went down and got like shifted around a bit. It seems that he's neutral with the changes. I wouldn't be surprised if they do buff him in 14.13 though, as he lost a bit of win rate, but obviously that comes with more people playing the champion. There will be some itemization adjustments people need to take. Obviously, Profane Hydra, I believe, will no longer be the optimal way to go. I haven't actually looked yet, but I presume it's Cindered Sky. Yep, Cindered Sky. Honestly, the likes of Stridebreaker might be once again a considerable option. Obviously, sample size is very low. Not a great win rate, but that could change obviously when people like actually take that direction. That was something he did have the option to build previously. However, yeah, if you want something a bit more standard, Cindered Sky, Cleaver, Shojin, all these options still work quite nice in the pick. It no longer looks like Profane Hydra is the way to go. Obviously, if you do want damage and you're looking to like carry games more consistently, then yeah, that is something you can opt into. But yeah, looking at the health item options, that tends to be the direction to go on this pick. He continues to sit within my B tier. Quinn, there have been some build variations I've seen people kind of like opt into, some like Static Shiv, some Yomus, obviously Symbiotic Souls is an option if you're looking for fast recalls and to like roam around the map quite aggressively. Or obviously your rune choices tend to be the likes of PTA, Electrocute, Fleet Footwork if you're looking for a bit more maneuverability. Scorch tends to be something people like running on her at the moment. She can access it quite easily with E and Q. Sits within the B tier at the moment. Doesn't really have great play rate. Obviously, Quinn is a very unpopular champion. Was even considered to be reworked at some point. Yeah, sits within the B tier at the moment. Vayne lost a lot of power with the 14.10 changes. She obviously got nerfed like early on in the split. Her Q cooldown went from 4 to 6, encouraging Q-Max. Obviously, that seems to be the more healthy playstyle, but are encouraging, rather than just being able to mow through tanks and champions with your W true damage bolts. Sits within the B tier at the moment. Obviously, if you can pilot the champion well, she definitely does climb. She is quite a pilot-dependent champion. Sion, underperforming for a long time at this point. Obviously, was looking to get a bit better with in this split with the Overlord's Bloodmail item coming in. It's fine on him. Obviously, it probably needs a bit of a buff. I would like to see the item be a bit more consistently purchased by the likes of Sion, Mundo, Set. Obviously, Set tends to be its most consistent purchaser, but Sion should definitely be someone who looks to opt into it. He's still a solid B2 option, though. Does get punished quite heavily by some of the matchups in the top lane. Rumble, an incredibly popular elite skewed pick. Not someone I'd really consider recommending within a mid elo and low elo so much, but if you're looking for a very aggressive AP lane pick, Rumble tends to be a bit easier to pilot in certain situations than Kennen. Obviously, Kennen can be punished by the likes of Exhaust. But Rumble definitely feels a bit of a niche within the top lane. If you're looking for an aggressive AP lane bully, Rumble could definitely be a solid option for you. Riven, incredibly heavily pilot-driven champion. Obviously, the build tends to be the Eclipse into like Bruiser options at the moment. Lethality Riven doesn't seem to be that popular, but Schroeder's Grudge being buffed could definitely see some sort of shift over. Once again, tends to be very pilot driven. If you don't put the games into Riven, you will lose a lot on this pick. I'd recommend avoiding her unless you do play the champion a lot. Cho'Gath, incredibly telegraphed, but honestly, at this point, he's able to stat check some of the champions within the top lane if you're slightly advantageous. Your builds tend to be like your Heartsteel. I mean, you don't really need Heartsteel until like second item in a lot of situations. You do really value defensive. Obviously, Cho'Gath is already a health stacker. Adding considerably larger pools of health with a lack of resistances can make you very squishy and punished by a lot of the maximum health damage a lot of top laners have access to at this point. Obviously, it's a matchup dependent situation. Cho'Gath, however, is a solid B tier pick. I'd recommend E-maxing, as it tends to be the most consistent way to play the pick. Trundle, definitely not as good as he has been in the past. He did get nerfed at some point recently, I believe. He was obviously too strong in being a stat-checky champion. At the moment, he can still split push very aggressively. He was kind of like a weaker version of Tryndamere in 14.11, but with Tryndamere being nerfed, they are kind of fairly level playing field at this point. Both of them very reliant on like their aggressive split pushing and the amount of damage they can do to towers with Demolish. Trundle, solid B tier option. I'm actually going to drop Skarner down, so Skarner is also going to be my B tier. This might be a controversial opinion, but Skarner, definitely a very elite skewed pick. This champion is incredibly high elo prone. Like you want to play this champion as like a mid game, early game like harasser into like team fighter, like pick potential team fighter. It doesn't scale very well. This champion will fall off quite heavily. Doesn't have like the kit really required to be as strong later on into the game. Obviously, the pick potential of the ultimate isn't as consistent as like the old Skarner, which makes him a bit weaker within that space, but he's still a solid champion. Like, if you do want to learn Skarner and play a lot of Skarner, then you can definitely find success on this pick. He got nerfed this patch as a like direct push to like nerf his early game down, so he isn't as aggressively elite skewed. But it gave him a bit of a buff later on into the game. Obviously, his passive damage went up by 1% maximum health, and his health growth went up. Well, it's slightly up later on into the game with the base health being nerfed. But yeah, the champion sits within the top of the B tier at the moment. It tends to be a bit more elite skewed. Moving on to the A tier, we have Singed. Singed is obviously a very heavily one-tricked champion. Very unpopular, but with the buffs he received in, I believe, 14.9, the champion... was it 4.9 or 4.11? I literally can't remember. But yeah, this pick is definitely in a better spot at the moment. Obviously, he did get buffed fairly recently. I can't specifically remember which patch, but tends to be very one-trick reliant. Has a very unique playstyle, and being able to, like, proxy and, like, learning that can be something quite important for this champion. You can still stand the lane with Singed, but it tends to be a bit more matchup dependent, tends to be a bit more one trick dependent as a champion. Renekton, honestly, I don't see Renekton having a lot of success at the moment. This champion on paper should, like, he has solid build options, you have different rune options you can kind of flex between. If you want a bit more burst, you can go like a 3.Q W max option with like Profane Hydra, PTA. If you want like extended trading patterns, you have like your options in your Conqueror. You can full max Q, full max E. Yeah, options there, like you can start Cleaver, stuff like that. But then in practice, the champion doesn't seem to be finding as much success. He's probably a high B, low A tier option. Renekton is still a solid pick. Just not as like high A tier as some of the other options within this tier. Wukong, once again, really heavily spikes on 2 items. That tends to be where a lot of his power lies. Once you have like your Trinity and your Sundered Sky, you tend to be really strong within team fights. That's where a lot of its power lies. A very solid A tier option if you do respect that you're not as strong as some of the other picks earlier on into the game. Camille got nerfed in 14.11. She's still a very solid A tier pick. Obviously, she was massively overperforming in mid and high elo. Within mid elo, she's obviously been clawed back down a bit. Still a solid option though, a good A tier pick. Really benefiting from Trinity Ravenous combo. Obviously works really nicely on that build at the moment. Kennen received some quality of life changes in like 14.8 or 7, something like that. Really did help him quite a bit. Makes him a lot nicer to play at this point. Obviously, once again, you need to be very strong in laning phase. That's where like a lot of his power budget lies. His team fighting is not as strong as it used to be. Obviously, Kennen ult has been stronger within the past. I would like to see them buff Kennen ult a bit more. I think Kennen ult should be a scary ultimate. That is something people should definitely fear. Right now, it's not quite there, but there's definitely power to this pick. You have build options in like your Protobelt, your Shadow Flame. I'm missing a very core first item for him here, I believe. But yeah, Kennen definitely in a solid spot at the moment with the quality of life changes. Oh no, it is Protobelt first. That is what people are going. I know there were some options with like Leandry's Kennen. We saw Broken Blade go it. I'm not so sold on it, but it is definitely something you can consider into some of the tankier matchups within the top lane. Nasus received some buffs, definitely benefiting a lot more off those. Obviously, his AD growth went up. His E had its mana cost relaxed a bit, makes it less aggressive to like continuously spam down. Don't go AP Nasus. It tends to be a trap in a lot of situations. Just go your standard Nasus. You should find a lot of success. Really good option to Kale and some of the ranged options. And yeah, you should be good to go. The AD growth going up helps Trinity, which is his core first item. Mordekaiser lost a bit of power in 14.11. They tried to shift some of his power towards his mid and early game, once again trying to unbind some of his low elo skew. He's still a solid option there, just not as S tier as he was before. Sits within the A tier now. Alawi, actually a high A tier option. I missed Yone. Yone actually should be in my C tier. I'll cover Yone and recover Alawi. So Yone received buffs this patch, obviously definitely did help him a lot. Something people did, something to note was people moved from, people were overtaking haste on Yone when people should have been taking Alacrity. It was actually really, really close in terms of like 50-50 and people going it. Now that people have moved over to Alacrity, once again, we will see a bit of a win rate spike through that. Yone sits within the C tier now, like a high C tier option. Not quite B tier, but could definitely make that push if people refine his itemization a bit more. In Alawi's case, Alawi doing decently at the moment. Very good into a lot of the tanks where you can consistently land E, chunk out targets. Black Cleaver buffs definitely did help her. She still has options in like your Cinder Sky, your Iceborne Gauntlet, and yeah, should be good to go. Alawi, very solid A tier option. Moving on, we have Pantheon. So Pantheon is also a very solid A tier pick. Obviously received changes in 14.11 to help him against tankier targets, giving a bit more maximum health on the W, combined with encouraging health building on the champion. Cleaver tends to be a very solid option on this pick now. I'm still very much a fan of Eclipse, especially if you're going into matchups where you can consistently auto queue and then like that's your trading pattern. And you can't take extended fights because you'll lose out. Pantheon's still not great into tanks. Like I'm just gonna be with you. They've done a lot to try and like alleviate the punish of playing into tanks as this champion, but it's still not enough. He still definitely struggles into his matchups. If you can still the Pantheon out, you will outscale him, and yeah, you can operate a bit better than him in within the game. But Pantheon, still a very solid A tier option. I'd recommend W maxing over E max. That was a trap some people did fall into. It tends to be a bit better to go at. You really do value the cooldown on that ability. Moving on, we have Ornn. Ornn is one of my favorite champions. I really like the Ornn's kit in general. There's definitely a lot of strength to this champion. He is hard countered by a lot of picks. Obviously, there's a lot of maximum health in the game at this point. The likes of Fiora are a must ban. That champion will run you over if they are good at piloting the pick. Obviously, it's not as punishing with a mid and low elo. Like up until maybe Emerald, you could get away with not banning the champion and maybe being fine in the matchup, just playing really safe and respectfully. But yeah, I'd recommend following Macro. Obviously, he's in Korea at the moment, but he has a really good Excel spreadsheet on some of the Ornn itemization options. But as long as you like intelligently choose your build throughout the game, and then you're giving out your ornaments later on to your teammates, you should find success on this champion. You just lose a bit of agency compared to some of the other carry options. Moving on, we have Gragas. So Gragas is an incredibly elite skewed lane holder in most spaces. Once again, you're looking at like your Roa, your Seraphs builds, Cosmic Drive, stuff like that tends to operate quite nicely on this pick. Arcane Comet, Phase Rush, Grasp, you have a lot of Keystone options. Gragas, a very solid A tier pick. Jax, which is countered by Gragas quite nicely, is also a very solid pick within the top lane. Obviously, Twisted Fate popularity going down will also hurt Jax, as he tends to be pretty good in that matchup. Once again, Jax is a champion very reliant on having matchups which are good for Counter-Strike, where you can make a lot of use out of this ability. Being able to snowball on sides, siege towers, Jax, very solid A tier option. Gwen, a great anti-tank EP option, definitely something which can be really valuable when used as counter pick. Blinding Gwen can be very punishing though if you're against someone aggressive early and you're not able to utilize so much of your tank shredding capabilities, then yeah, you can be punished for it quite a bit. But Gwen, a great mid to late game champion. Once you have your item spikes, you're really solid within the game. Heimerdinger, once again, I will really recommend this champion. It's in a great spot at the moment, a very good A tier pick. Obviously really benefiting from some of the itemization, just very unpopular and requires a bit more of a unique playstyle with turret placement. But yeah, solid A tier option. Malphite, a very good counter pick. Champion. If you're blind Malphite, you'll be punished for it very heavily. Something I would really recommend avoiding. Like, only use this champion as a counter pick. And even then, as a counter pick, there are issues with the champion. Obviously, very linear playstyle. If you fall behind, it can be very punishing to play. You're once again leaving up a lot of your agency to your team, hoping they can kind of like take you through the game, make use of your ultimate. Still a very solid A tier option though, very easy to pilot champion, one of, if not the easiest in the game. Moving on, we have Teemo. So Teemo is a champion which is very reliant on your rune choices and your itemization. Adam the Teemo is the person I'd recommend going for this, and just like figuring out what itemization works for you, your fleet, your PTA, Arcane Comet, Dark Harvest, Electrocute. There are so many keystone options for this champion, and honestly it tends to be very matchup dependent, but he's in a very good spot. Obviously Camille being very popular did help Teemo out quite a bit. He's very strong in that matchup, but he's still a great A tier pick, something I would definitely recommend learning and playing if you're looking for a champion like it. Fiora, once again, also a very counter pick reliant champion, very good into Ornn, very good into lots of the telegraphed tanks, where you can make use of your parry and be very aggressive in lane, forcing people to move onto sides where you can out siege them, and yeah, that tends to be where a lot of your power lies. Pretty hard to pilot champion though. I wouldn't recommend it so much unless you do put a lot of games in and you're very much willing to use it as a counter pick option. Shen is also within my A tier. Shen is a very solid pick at the moment. Obviously they've given him back a bit of power. They made his passive a bit easier to play around. They gave him 4 more base AD. If you're running Flash Ignite, you're playing aggressively with like your Titanic Hydra, you can definitely find success with this champion in lane. I would recommend Heart still though, not so much some of this like passive Shen gameplay where you're getting some fires. You're kind of going even in lane, not really doing a huge amount. If you play Shen aggressively, get advantages, you can definitely have agency within the game. Obviously some games aren't going to be like that, you want to sit back, but yeah, Titanic, Heartsteel, Hollow Radiance, Sunfire, there are options there. You can kind of pick and choose depending on what you need within the game. Redemption, obviously a popular Shen item when you are able to support your team, and you have a direct carry. Shen, very solid A tier option. Kled and Warwick, once again, go as a pairing. Kled with your Profane Hydra. Warwick has a lot more options. Yeah, Bork, Stridebreaker, Titanic Hydra. There are options there. Warwick in a pretty good spot at the moment. Obviously, Barrier being buffed did help both these champions when they do opt into it. Kled in this space tends to go Profane and like some like lethality options, but can go like Bruiser heavy if you are looking for a bit more durability. Once again, both these champions are very early game skewed. You need to be able to snowball you early, and through like mainly just matchup knowledge and enemy not so much enemy not knowing on how your champions are piloted. But yeah, both of them sit within the A tier. Tryndamere drops down to the A tier. Obviously, was probably deserving of an S plus spot last patch. I left him within the S tier. I didn't want to like overplace him and fight like people. I mean, then like over time it ends up being realized that he's not actually as overpowered. But Tryndamere was really, really impressive and strong last patch. Like one of the top picks within the game. They hit him really heavily this patch. 5 AD down on the Q at all times, which is really quite a hefty nerf. Combined with 5 damage loss on E at all times. He drops from like probably S plus tier to like low A. He probably deserves to sit around here now. But yeah, the champion was really impressive. Grasp Fleet basically made him unmovable in lane with the likes of Ravenous Hydra. Yeah, Tryndamere, now an A tier option. Moving on to the S tier, we have a couple more picks here. Cassiopeia, once again, stays with my S tier. A great option within the top lane if you're looking for someone with a lot of kiting power. Really good into top laners which really struggle to get onto you. Can be really impressive to play against. A very solid option. Great itemization at the moment. Really underplayed. But yeah, great S tier pick. Poppy is also in a great spot at the moment. A great anti-mobility champion. Once again, both these picks I'd really recommend using as counter pick options. But both of them really strong at being very good against anti-mobility options. Being good as anti-mobility options. Poppy obviously has access into both bruiser and tank variants, but is in a very solid spot at the moment. A great S tier pick. Tahm Kench, I will once again tell you to go Wizard Frog. This build is still really good. Your heart's still Swifties, Riftmaker, Protobelt, Rabadon, Flex option, kind of last slot build is still in a great spot. I recommend Dark Seal probably like later on. Don't pick up Dark Seal early though. It doesn't tend to work quite nice. Doesn't tend to be as great early on into the game until you have like AP ratio stacked on your passive. But the build is really good at the moment. I'd recommend watching Noam Watley. He is a very good Tahm Kench player. Ghost TP were the keystones. I believe you could kind of flex between like Flash TP now as an option. But yeah, Tahm Kench in a great spot at the moment. A very good S tier pick. KO also a great S tier champion at the moment, has incredible scaling, has good build options in both AD and AP. We've seen recently like both AD and AP Cal have been solid viable options, which is nice to see. I'm glad we can see both build options being strong. Once again, tends to be very low elo skewed. If you can scale throughout the game, she spikes incredibly hard at level 16. Very hard to move this champion, very hard to play against this champion later on in the game. Obviously, you tend to want to place things which can move her out of lane early, set up dives with your jungler. Obviously, you're not going to have that level of coordination within low elo, so it's a lot easier to get away with it. Kel, a great S tier option. Once again, probably a bit more counter pick reliant, but yeah, still a very solid champion. Good into tanks, so definitely something I'd really recommend playing her into. Urgot isn't in as great spot as he was last split. Honestly, close to the A tier. The meta tends to be pretty rough for him at the moment. The ADC shift towards like heavy long range, but like a bit more burst, is pretty rough for him. He actually was pretty good into assassins back when they were stronger. Assassins obviously this split have been progressively underperforming. He sits at the back of the S tier though. He still has solid itemization, and honestly if the meta was a bit better for him, I could definitely see him being an S plus to champion. Tends to be a bit better within low and mid elo. I'd recommend just defaulting on the likes of Hullbreaker if you're going toggle and like you're toggling correctly. If not, Cleaver tends to operate quite nicely as a first item option. And then you still have your Sterix. Overlord's Bloodmelt is a very solid item on this champion. You can go Stridebreaker, not so much of a fan of it, and then Jack Show later on. But I got still a very deserving S tier champion. Set is also with my S tier. The second most popular champion in the game at the moment, second most popular top laner in the game at the moment. Aatrox obviously once again has reclaimed the top spot with the adjustments this patch, but Set in a great spot at the moment. Really good on Stridebreaker, Hullbreaker, Sterek, Overlord's Bloodmail. That tends to be a really solid full item core for him, and then Cinder Sky, Cleaver as like flex options later on. But yeah, the champion's in a great spot. A very good S tier pick at the moment. Some of the other champions here, so we have Garen. Garen moves up from the A tier to the S tier. This champion really did deserve it. Obviously he spikes really nicely on current Phantom Dancer. It's really good on him. Having access to an option later on into your build if you're overcapped in Zephyr at level 15 is also really nice for him once you've like completed your build. Deadman's very solid third item option, and then you can go like your Fawn, your Starrick, stuff like this. And Garen, a great S tier pick. You can even go some of the crit variants, like IE can be quite nice as a third item option if you are snowballing. Some of the other champions here, so Volibear also moves up to the A tier. This is, of course, the Roa Flicker Blades build. It's an interesting one, but it's finding success and like very deserving of an S tier spot. I'm honestly surprised how quickly it did pick up. And like with these builds, you tend to see a decline in win rate when more people have picked it up. But actually, it maintained its win rate. It's still in a very solid spot, deserving of an S tier spot. Yorick, incredibly low elo skew champion, performs really well there where people don't understand how to correctly play into Maiden. You do have both the lethality and the bruiser variants. I would recommend kind of like picking which one you want within the game and then like kind of going with it. Obviously for lethality you tend to run Arcing Comet, and like you have different build variations. Profane Hydra tends to be like your first item. For bruiser, which is what I'd recommend a bit more, you have you have rune options in like in Conqueror or Grasp. Both these rune options work quite nicely on it. And then you can go like Trinity and like flex around bruiser options. That tends to be where your strength lies. Shoulder Scourge being buffed this patch does help lethality a bit more. Both are very viable. Kind of pick which one you need. Mundo also moves up from my A tier into the S tier. He has been performing fine. I mean, Mundo overperforms in low elo. Like Mundo is obviously a champion very much designed for low elo. This pick is very simple to play. Spike's incredibly hard at level 16 for like for some reason they added in that like text, which is like 5% bonus on each form of healing when you are level 16, which is absurd. It's such a strong level 16 Spike, but you scale really hard with the likes of Heartsteel. Warmlooks is a considerable first item option. Obviously, if you're not going to able to consistently get as many Heartsteel procs, it's definitely there if you're going to get moved a bit within laning phase. And then yeah, you have loads of build options. Sunfire, Spirits, Overlord's Blood Mail tends to be like your main core, but yeah, you can flex around a bit and should find a success. And Zac was within my S plus tier. He's still a very good champion, just not as head and shoulders above some of the other picks within the S tier, so I'm going to drop him down a bit, but he's still very good at the moment. Definitely something I would really recommend if you are looking for a good engaged tanky option within the top lane. Bit more mid game skewed and bit more mid elo skewed. The likes of Mundo will be a bit easier to pilot within low elo, but you should still find success on the pick. I'm very happy with the S tier at the moment. These champions it gives you a range of like things you need within the game. Obviously, we do have a lot of easier to pilot champions within the S tier at the moment, but that is what you'll get with mid and low elo. But still very good high elo options though. If you're looking for something which can like really carry you throughout the ranks, Fiora, Camille, still great options. But yeah, there are loads of picks here. We're in a pretty good top lane meta again. So yeah, thank you guys for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.